Good afternoon. Last Sunday, we saw a horrific attack on a religious group when Thomas Jacob Sanford drove his truck into a meeting house of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Grand Blanc, Michigan, during their worship services. He opened fire with his gun, killing two worshipers, then set the building itself on fire, killing two more. 8 others were injured, and the church was completely destroyed. He was killed in the parking lot by local law enforcement. We mourn with the families who lost loved ones, with the injured, and with the Grand Blanc LDS and wider community. Mr. Stanford, as reported by someone who talked with him earlier that week, believed that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the Antichrist. Many people may not have heard this term before, and many certainly have, as it appears in the New Testament and has some cultural significance and weight. I think in any case, to hear it expressed by a person who a few days later attacked the church of that Christian denomination and killed worshipers is more than jarring. We here at the museum thought understanding where the concept of the Antichrist has appeared, if at all, in American history, and thus in the American project itself, would serve the public interest as we all process what happened in Michigan. To do that, we have with us Dr. Matt Sutton, the Barry Family Distinguished Professor in the Liberal Arts at Washington State University, and Dr. Christopher Blythe, Assistant Professor of English at Brigham Young University, and importantly for this particular interview, Dr. Blythe is also a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Both of these scholars have expertise in Christian theology as it relates to the United States of America. Thank you both for being with us.
Happy to be here.
Chris, first, deep condolences to your religious community. We are mourning with you.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that.
So, we'll give this question to both of you. Please give us a definition or definitions of the Antichrist.
You want to
You
jump
want
in,
to kick us
Chris?
off? Which one of us should start?
Why don't you start?
Okay,
Alphabetical. Chris, go ahead.
the Antichrist is, the word shows up in the New Testament, but most of the scriptures we have that actually talks about this last days figure calls it the beast or the man of sin. And so in modern Christianity, it's a hodgepodge of proof texts that tell a story about a false messianic leader. And of course, in the book of Revelation, it's a critique of political persecution. The Emperor Nero. Latter-day Saints, as a Latter-day Saint, we follow an older Protestant model. Early on, we followed a Protestant model of thinking that the Antichrist was related to the Church of Rome, Roman Catholicism. And you can read early Latter-day Saint sources that say his number is 666. Why? Because there are 666 false Protestant churches that have been built from Roman Catholicism. And so we have a strain of thought that has that. But in modern Latter-day Saint thought, the term Antichrist is never used. In fact, when it does show up, it's almost always Latter-day Saints picking up from evangelical culture and pulling it right in. And they know that from the great popular culture representations of Damien in the Omen series, which, just like the Left Behind series that evangelicals of my generation grew up reading, is a major political leader looking for a one world government. So there's always this question back and forth. Is the Antichrist this great evil religious leader, always from the larger religious group that you can imagine? Or is he a technological savvy, pretender who's pretending to want to bring peace to the world, to unite it, but really to trap us in sort of a anti-Christian world government?
Okay.
One more thing.
Yeah,
In the Book of Mormon, the Antichrist is just a term used for bad folks. And so it shows up a few times saying, as if anybody could be an Antichrist.
Yeah, and I think that's the way that I see it playing out in US history is that much of the time, the term of the Antichrist is just like literally what it says, somebody who is Antichrist. And there's references in the Bible to the spirit of the Antichrist. And so anybody can have the spirit of the Antichrist. This is just somebody who's not a Christian, who's a skeptic, who maybe tries to undermine the power of, whoever the true Christians are at that time. But really, in the last 150 years, kind of a subsect of subsects of Protestants really developed a new theology of the Antichrist. And this is what Chris was talking about that some modern day Latter-day Saints tap into, which is that they take these really obscure biblical passages spread throughout Daniel, Thessalonians, 1 John, Revelation, and they compile them all together to create this composite of this great figure. And so they still believe there's a spirit of the Antichrist that might be, out there today working against us. But then there's the capital T Antichrist, who's going to be this last days figure. And that as we get closer and closer to the end of the age, to the end of this current church era, he is going to appear and he's going to deceive almost everybody. So the idea is that he is going to be the false Christ, and people are going to see him, and he's going to heal people. He's going to perform miracles. He's going to bring peace and prosperity. And so people are going to be deceived and choose to follow him. And so then there's a whole lot of theology that spins off of that as well. And so for generations, people have tried to speculate, who is the Antichrist? And they read these obscure biblical passages and try and identify. So, in the 1930s, people thought maybe it was Franklin Roosevelt. Chris mentioned the number 666. At the very first set of ballots at the Democratic National Convention in 1932, Roosevelt got 666 votes. And so that was immediately seen as perhaps a sign that Roosevelt is going to be the Antichrist. In the,
Ronald
1990,
Wilson Reagan, right, is 666,
yeah,
6.
six letters in each of his names. Ronald Wilson Reagan, yep. And so there's been this effort to try to figure out who the Antichrist is. I remember in the 90s hearing that it was this, kind of secondary leader in the United Nations from Romania who was acquiring power. And, you could look at all these different signs to tell us that eventually he was going to become the guy who was going to consolidate power through it and through the UN, like through some of these global organizations. So it's a really amorphous term that has changed over time in a lot of different ways, but it's malleable enough that people can apply it to almost any situation in their current era and kind of make it work, make it fit.
I think that's so good. I
Okay.
remember as probably a 9-year-old boy sitting at the kitchen table in my house. I was an Episcopalian at the time, and most of our religious theology probably came from pop culture, not from church. Church is ceremonial.
Good
But
Episcopalian.
yeah, and I remember my father sitting down with me and saying, when World War III happens, the Antichrist is going to come out, and he showed me. This is Matt's book, and I'm assuming it's going to. He had an oatmeal jar there, and he showed me the scan code, the barcode at the back, and he said, "This is the number of the beast," because everybody has to get it on them to sell or buy. And he said, "One day we're all going to be asked to do this, and when that happens, we're going to move to the family farm." Um, and so I think that that idea is so interesting because it came from evangelicalism. I mean, Martin Luther has it too, but it comes to evangelicalism, and then it just disperses out. And I love horror movies, these great horror movies, Rosemary's Baby, The Omen, brought that into even non-religious American homes and filtered it down to us. So we all have this idea of a crazy last days wacko.
Okay, well, this is super helpful. I appreciate both of you sort of explaining. I think a good way to label the Antichrist is amorphous and malleable, uh,
Mm,
meaning different things to different people, certainly rooted in biblical text, but exactly what that is not well defined. So now I want to ask a little bit about how in American history, different denominations and or religious people use the concept. Matt, why don't we start with you? I know you
Yeah,
mentioned one or two already, but fill us in with some additional stories here.
yeah, no, it is. It's a concept that kind of comes and goes and hasn't been terribly prominent for much of US history. It really was seen for, many of the kind of the old American denominations as this kind of figure of kind of evil, death, destruction, sin, but it wasn't an obsession. It wasn't a preoccupation. It was really more about the idea of the spirit of the Antichrist, that you were worried about people behaving poorly against Jesus, but it wasn't this singular global figure. Other than every once in a while, during the Revolution, there were tracts that were circulating about, well, King George is the Antichrist. But even then, it might have been more, not might have been. Even then, it was more of a like he's really the spirit of the Antichrist. It's not that
Right.
anybody believed he was actually going to build a global kingdom and deceive people in the same way that we think that modern Christians think of the Antichrist. During the Civil War, again, anytime there's war, it's a good way to demonize your enemies, literally, and to argue that they represent something else. But the other thing that I found interesting in my research when we get into the 20th century is as white fundamentalists and then later white evangelicals began to identify the Antichrist, it was always something kind of outside of the United States. It was always this foreign enemy. But if you read some of the literature coming out of Black American churches, they're very much worried that the Antichrist is here and that Antichrist is represented and embodied in lynching and in Jim Crow and in really the US government not taking seriously the civil rights of Black Americans. So you can also recognize that there's a racial and class component in how American Christians have understood the Antichrist in their own positionality relative to positions of power.
This is always the case. So when Quakers in England identified the Antichrist, they didn't label it the church in Rome. They labeled it the church in Canterbury, right? It's the Anglican Church, the Church of England. Um, we see this all over the place. And so I am fascinated by the history of the Nation of Islam and Islam. And so Muhammad had a lot of teachings about the the Masih Dajjal, right? This false Christ character who is pivotal. Jesus returns in Islam with the Mahdi, and they fight the Dajjal together. And so ideas of this are ranging very anciently. In America, the Nation of Islam grabs on to these black church ideas and concerns about white America and class. And when we say, the blue-eyed devil, Nation of Islam is pointing to a devil in white people, it's the same rhetoric of the Antichrist, this large structure that aims to deceive and mislead and to oppress, and then the core elect group of individuals and American denominations that I probably shouldn't use the word denomination, American groups that aren't allowed to be fully integrated into the society are regularly positioning themselves against what they see as oppressive powers. And that oppressive power is always the Antichrist. So that positionality, I like that term, wherever you're located, which means for our shooter, to call Mormons the Antichrist might play into anti-Mormon rhetoric generally, but to call them the Antichrist means he sees them as like a force, right? This is a group that he's threatened by, rather than just, the weird religion at the end of the corner that you're annoyed by and might feel prejudice towards.
Yeah, that was the first thing I thought about when I read the news about what happened last week was that the the folks who kind of have this modern version of the Antichrist is this global leader who's going to build a world movement and is going to be a false religious leader, a false Jesus, that they always believe he's going to have a false religion, and it's almost always a he also. And so
Correct.
that changes over time. So as Chris mentioned, traditionally it's most often been the Pope, it's been the Vatican, it's been the Roman Catholic Church, but there have been other iterations of it. In the 80s and 90s, we were kind of at the height in the United States of the counter cult movement. And I, grew up reading books by Walter Martin and Josh McDowell that talked about Mormonism as a cult. And certainly it would be, as a cult, it would be a subset of the Antichrist religion. And so the Antichrist was working, and especially a religion like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that is so close to traditional Protestantism that it really looks like, if you're building a theology of the Antichrist, it looks like something that could truly deceive people into thinking this is the true church, when in fact, from their perspective, it is the church of the Antichrist. And so while, nobody was saying the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was the Antichrist, there was always this kind of undertone in this rhetoric that Mormons were complicit, Mormons were helping build the Antichrist false religious church. And a lot of that has gone away, which is fascinating in terms of thinking about the political reasons why that's gone away. But nevertheless, in the 80s and 90s, this was really prominent.
Sure. Yeah.
So, Matt, you're saying in the 80s and 90s, there was a prominent religious belief out there that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was the Antichrist. Was this
No, but that
prominent?
it would help facilitate the rise of the Antichrist. It was one of these handful of false religions that were going to help deceive people, which would then pave the way for the Antichrist. Because once you can get them, away from the true faith. Sorry for those of you who are just listening, not watching. I'm doing air quotes. But once you get away from the perceived true faith, then it becomes easier to replace it with a false faith. And so Mormonism was seen as one of these false faiths that's Christian adjacent, but not true Christianity. And so this is, again, this is the world that I grew up in the 80s and
Right.
90s.
Is it Martin who does this book, The Kingdom of Cults?
That's the one, Kingdom of the
So
Cults. Yep.
it
Yep.
links everybody together in that term kingdom, right? Which I think does have implications of Antichrist. Even though I think a lot of the evangelical rhetoric, because the UN gets so associated with this global power, that we're, John Birch Society materials and stuff are always saying that New Age is becoming this Antichrist religion. It's going to be perceived, brought out. But yeah, false Christianity. And so Mormonism, Jehovah Witnesses, Christian Science, Seventh-day Adventists sometimes gets all pulled in there as a movement that's preaching and teaching against true Christianity, which is usually a narrow body of evangelicals.
Yeah, and that's the real genius of this kind of apocalyptic theology is that it can be applied in so many ways to both explain kind of how we got to where we are and to explain where we think we're going. It's a way to delegitimize your theological or political enemies. And so we can see in different eras, it's going to be the Pope, it's going to be Church of Jesus Christ, it's going to be the Jehovah's Witnesses, it's going to be Islam, after 9/11, certainly.
Yes.
Uh,
I
Was Islam
remember.
labeled as the Antichrist pretty prominently after 9/11?
oh
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. And antiquity. I mean, this is the religion that's close to us. I mean, Jesus is a prophet. Jesus is even a messianic figure, but he's not the Son of God. And so this is pretty threatening to medieval Christians as well for that closeness to it. I remember waking up the day President Obama was elected in Logan, Utah, and I'm a folklorist, right? So I got a text, and this text certainly originated in a sort of nominal evangelical area, but it circulated throughout the United States and was sent to me twice that day by Latter-day Saints, which was saying, this is such a fascinating text. It was the according to the Bible, the Antichrist will appear out of nowhere and preach peace. He'll be a Muslim, he'll be African American, and in his mid 40s. And all my friends are like, oh my gosh. And of course, that's all nonsense. There's no such thing as Muslims and the time the book of Revelation was written. And it certainly doesn't mention Islam religion that's not around. And so
Hmm.
but yeah, whenever someone's threatened and wants to point out their political or religious enemies, they have a beautiful narrative to just latch onto and throw right over.
What? So, Matt, you said that this idea of the Antichrist, well, how prominent is it now? Like in the 21st century, how prominent is this religious concept of the Antichrist in various denominations? Do we know?
Yeah, well, I think it would not be very prominent at all in the mainline churches, kind of the old classic, more liberal churches. And certainly where it is used, it would be used metaphorically, not as a literal leader who's going to come to power through something like the United Nations. It's still relatively prominent among evangelicals, but again, it ebbs and flows based on the situation. So Chris was talking about Obama, and actually John McCain tapped into this. He ran a campaign ad that kind of was a spoof of Obama, but it wasn't really a spoof of Obama as this kind of charismatic leader who would draw people. And McCain's people were playing on this Antichrist trope, and they knew
Uh,
exactly what they were doing. So it was prominent there. It was prominent after 9/11. It seems to have declined a little bit as evangelicals, many of them, 80 some percent of them believe they have a champion in the White House and who is consolidating power. And so then it doesn't work for your theology. And so, the guy who's consolidating power is, the Christ defender, not the Christ, not the Antichrist, but it will come and go again. So it's the other thing I think that's interesting, and I talk to my students about this, is just the way it's become naturalized, that the kind of nuance that Chris began with in explaining how vague the Bible is on the Antichrist and how many different ways it's been understood in church history. The average churchgoer today at an evangelical congregation doesn't realize that. They just assume that the idea of the Antichrist is a coming world leader who's going to consolidate power and, build a counter church. Like they just assume that's what the Bible has said, and all Christians have believed in all times and all places. And this is, what I love about history is that it blows up some of these myths that people like me grew up with.
Right.
Absolutely. I can remember going in at 12 years old to my Episcopalian priest, and I just read Revelation for the first time. And I had read it through the lens of the omen, and I sat down with him and I was freaked out. I had all these questions, and he spent the next hour telling me how the book of Revelation shouldn't be in the Bible. He didn't even want to walk through this. I mean, he explained the history. He said this is actually this is Christian protest literature against the emperor. And then he said, "Let's focus you over here," and gave me some C.S. Lewis, right? So it is very interesting to see how conservative and mainline Christianity collide on a topic like this.
Yeah, sure. So for both of you, when you heard, so this was quite a violent scene last Sunday, um, very violent, uh, and then to have reports that this person believed that this particular church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is the Antichrist. Did this surprise you? And if so, why? And if not, why not? Matt, let's start with you and then Chris.
Yeah, the challenge with a situation like this is people are obviously who behave like this are not coming at it from a rational, kind of theologically consistent sort of way. Like there's something deeply wrong with this person or was deeply wrong with this person. And so on the one hand, it's hard to take too seriously what he believes he's engaged in doing and how that reflects anybody's religious or theological beliefs. But certainly, I think the thing that, for me at least, was important about it or interesting, I guess is a better way to say it, is just the rhetoric and the way this rhetoric gets used and appropriated for both political and violent ways, and to think about what is happening in our culture that we see an elevation of this antichrist talk. And this would be another topic for another day, but Peter Thiel's been giving these antichrist lectures in San Francisco in the last few weeks, and there's something going on right now again about this resurgence and thinking about the antichrist. And so again, I wouldn't want to put too much on this event because it's so unique and so abnormal and so exceptional. But at the same time, I think it just shows us the enduring power of Antichrist rhetoric in U.S. history.
The Antichrist is just one of various ways we demonize other religions and other people. And so it's not at all surprising to me that this person hated the people he was going to harm. It's not at all surprising to me to learn that he viewed himself as a victim to them. Um, I, if a Jewish man was shot in a small town in America, I would say, well, that was a crazy, terrible person that shot him. But I would also take seriously anti-Semitism that might have paved the way for a crazy person to pick up and put action in his own hands. And I think 100% we can trace a sort of anti-Mormon rhetoric that's been allowed to exist as an acceptable prejudice in American history. The Book of Mormon musical is funny, but that all Americans think this is really exciting to go to a musical that mocks one religious faith and no one's speaking back to it is a little weird. The idea that major pastors within the last week and months have written notes saying Mormonism is a demon religion, not using Antichrist, but saying it's a demonic. Mark Driscoll. You can look up these really popular quotes right now that have gone around. I think all those people are complicit. I 100% think that if I was, I think every person who has given a uh, sermon or a lecture or a pamphlet that labels another religion as sort of subhuman and evil, and something terrible happens to those people, I think they have to be somewhat responsible for that. And so yeah, I say here we have a crazy guy, but I don't give a pass to any American that's spread prejudice. That's how this works. If you're a racist and you say terrible things about the dangers of black people, well, maybe you're not a guy who would actually do harm to an African American person, but you're still complicit. And so I 100% hold pastors and individual Americans who have spread rhetoric of prejudice and hatred to Latter-day Saints, including Hollywood producers who've done a whole slew of movies where Latter-day Saints are violent historically and violent in the present, such as the recent Under the Banner of Heaven. I think all that presents a certain projection of what a Latter-day Saint is. And it would be a lot easier to put a bullet in that fictional demonic character than the actual flesh and blood Latter-day Saint.
Okay, thank you both. Last question for both of you, and then we'll bring this to a close. Advice for all of us listening. What should we do with this? The Antichrist is a religious concept. It ebbs and flows. It's amorphous. It's malleable. Um, any parting
Yeah,
thoughts on what we should do with it?
I'll say two things. I think Chris is absolutely right that there is a tremendous history in the United States of anti-Mormonism, and it should be identified and should be called out. And it is like Mormons have taken the brunt of a whole lot of hate for 150 years, more than 150 years. So, so I think it's important for Americans to understand that. Um, the other thing, and this is why I do what I do every day, and what I was doing this morning teaching my class, is that I just think I love, history is not the solution to all of our problems, but I think history is a solution to some of our problems. And the more people understand about the past and their own theology, their own belief systems, and the way it's shaped by their particular cultural, social, racial contexts, then the better off we'll all be. So I guess this is a plug for exactly what you're doing with the National Museum of American Religion, and for the NEH, and for more study and work on religion, not less.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt.
I
Chris.
probably already said what I think we should do. We should not demonize each other, but we should also, you know, we all have wild relatives who are a little on edge and a little too angry, and we should look out for those folks. We should make sure they get help when they need it if we're in a position to make those suggestions. And when our mental health falls apart, we should actually go talk to somebody, figure it out. And if you are demonizing or polarizing American culture, you we need to stop.
And not a chatbot, Chris.
What's that?
And not a chatbot. Don't go
That's
talk
right.
to a chatbot.
Not a chatbot.
Okay, well, thank you both. We have been speaking with Dr. Matt Sutton, the Berry Family Distinguished Professor in the Liberal Arts at Washington State University, and Dr. Christopher Blythe, Assistant Professor of English at Brigham Young University and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We appreciate both of them for sharing. Well, Chris and Matt, I appreciate both of you for coming on this afternoon and sharing your expertise uh, about the Antichrist in American history. It's been helpful for me, and I believe it's been helpful for those who have been listening. We'll also send this out via our podcast, Religion in the American Experience. Thank you very much.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you, Chris.